left to right. Russell Westbrook.
You love the Philadelphia Eagles. Let me get a hell yeah!
What is up, everybody? Welcome to Party on Broad. It is Deibs, Mr. Crockpot on Twitter. Today, we are going to talk about Carson Wentz. We're going to grade his performance in 2019. We're going to look ahead to 2020 and kind of just run down the Eagles' needs and positions of need. And joining us today, we have Adam. Follow him on Twitter at Adam Schwartz. What's up, man?
Hey, Chris. Great to be back. It's been almost half a year since I last showed up on this pod, so thanks for having me back. Not the way anybody wanted to see that season end, but we finished ahead of the Cowboys, so we'll take the victories where we can get them, I guess.
I'm doing much better today. It's Tuesday, in case anyone's watching late. We did a pre-OB last night, and man, it was like just straight doom and gloom, man. Yesterday, I was just hurting. Today, I kind of 50% better. Let's talk about Carson Wentz, man. A little bit before we get started, just so everyone is aware, Adam is on one side of the Carson Wentz spectrum. I'm a little bit on the other. Let's get into it. Adam, you lead us off, man. What was your overall quick take on Carson Wentz in 2019 before we kind of dissect some more stuff?
Absolutely, yeah. If anybody wants to read a longer take on Carson Wentz, they can go to thepaintedlines.com, look up my writing. I think I did an article in both September and October, and maybe one in November, kind of tracking him. I don't think anything really changed from there, but for those who didn't see that, Carson Wentz took a major step back this year in pretty much every facet of the game, and I think there's major question marks going forward, and it's going to be very interesting to see where he goes from here. But overall, I think his performance was mediocre at best, and I think what we saw Josh McCown do in that kind of highlighted both Carson Wentz's biggest strength, which is finishing in the red zone, and how weak he is pretty much everywhere else.
Wow. Okay. So I agree with you. I don't think this was an excellent season by Carson Wentz. We're going to get into this more. It was pretty much a shit show for Carson Wentz. That first half of the season. Was it all his fault? We're going to get into it. And then he had that last month, that last stretch of 4 or 5 games where, things seemed to click. Was the level of competition, worthwhile? Not necessarily. We're going to get into it. All right, I'll lead us off, right, man?
Go ahead.
I got some numbers for you, dude, all right?
Shoot them at me.
490, 363, 254, 169, and 159. Those are the total yards.
Hold on. Let me see if I can do this in order. Because it's Alshon Jeffries. I believe Aguilar is the 363. Greg Ward is third.
Got it?
No, Greg Ward's third. I don't know who's fourth. Deshaun Jackson, I think, is the 5th one on there.
Yeah. J-Jaw. So, yeah, I got to
forget about him.
I think everyone did.
Including Wentz most of the time.
So, obviously, you got to lead off a Carson Wentz pod with him being the first quarterback in NFL history to throw 4,000 yards without a single wide receiver reaching 500 yards receiving. So those were the numbers of Jeffrey, Deshaun, Aguilar. Those 3 guys, man, had 9 touchdowns, and all of them were out for basically nearly half of the season. After those 3 guys, Greg Ward and J-Jaw had 1 touchdown catch each. Think about that, man. Of all the team, you had 2 wide receivers with 1 touchdown the rest of the season for a half a season, man. Come on, dude. The level of talent on this roster, that's got to criticize Carson Wentz, you've got to start off with that, man.
So I think there is some merit to Deshaun Jackson got hurt. Now, it's tough to talk about Dustin Aguilar So let me start with Nelson Aguilar, because I think that's a perfect place to kind of start the Carson Wentz discussion. So was absolutely incredible at getting open on crosses, deep ins, any of those horizontal routes. Nelson Aguilar was winning them consistently, and Carson Wentz could not hit it. Aguilar bowed him out on a couple of really terrible throws, but if Carson Wentz could lead him on those deep crosses, Nelson Aguilar would have had a lot more than 500 yards. Alshon Jeffrey's great down the sideline. Wentz would go to him, he was throwing them out of bounds, and then Jeffrey got injured 10 yards short. But with Nelson Aguilar, the problem ended up being that he's amazing at those horizontal routes that Wentz could not throw. There's actually, I did some video breakdown of Wentz pump, just could not get the ball out for some reason. And then on those deep ends would throw it behind him to take away the yards after catch. Not even Nelson Aguilar. When you think Nelson Aguilar, you think those yards after catch. We remember those spin moves, those jukes to get into the end zone. And Wentz wasn't giving him those opportunities to do it. So when talking about are better wide receivers going to help? Well, Carson Wentz was pretty good on those vertical balls, which Nelson Aguilar wasn't good at. So there's kind of a mismatch in terms of skill, what Wentz was good at and what Aguilar was good at. But I don't think the wide receivers were bad. And I think often, even Jordan Matthews, when I did film breakdown of him, he was getting open, and Wentz was having two major issues. The first is that he would almost always throw it to the wrong guy. His ability, he became what I call a zero read quarterback. When we talk about the NFL draft and, prospects, can he go through his reads? So typically what you want to see in a quarterback is somebody who goes through his progression. Start deep, work to short. Then there's one read quarterbacks who are basically during the play watching a linebacker or a safety, trying to move that linebacker or safety, then fit it in wherever the linebacker or safety doesn't. Carson Wentz was a zero read quarterback this year. What I mean by that is he would make a read before the snap based on the alignment of the defense and throw based on the alignment, which didn't work because other teams were aware that he was doing this. And so they'd show one defense back into another defense, a different route would be open, and Carson would just never find it. And so I think when we talk about Carson Wentz's wide receivers didn't produce, wide receivers don't produce if you're not throwing it to them when they're open, and then you throw it to them when they're covered, or you miss them, downfield. Wentz had a couple balls, especially first half of the season down the sideline. He just kept throwing them out of bounds. He wasn't even giving his receivers a chance. I think if people are hoping that better wide receivers are the answer, I think they're going to be a little disappointed because the lack of production was in large part because Wentz just wasn't giving them a chance to produce. The other thing I would say is Wentz had 3 500-yard receivers this year. Zach Ertz is essentially a wide receiver in everything but listed position. He had, I think, either 1,000 or around 1,000 yards. Dallas Goedert was, 800 yards. He's also functionally a wide receiver. Miles Sanders was, I think, the second best receiving running back in the league in terms of yards per catch behind only Dustin Aguilar. And those wheel routes, man, Sanders, if Wentz had been able to get the ball leading Sanders instead of forcing Sanders to come back to them, Sanders would have had some really long, really nice touchdowns. But everyone's saying he didn't have a 500-yard wide receiver. Zach Ertz is a wide receiver. Dallas Goedert's a wide receiver. It's really a distinction without distinction.
All right, so I'll go to Nelson Aguilar. There's no way I'm going to give this guy props, man. This is a single most frustrating wide receiver probably in the entire NFL. He cost you at least a few games. Alshon Jeffrey, man, I don't know if he caught a single ball, past 15 yards. I do agree with you, man, that his Carson Wentz's progression, and he made some very bad decisions and very bad reads that first half of the season. But Alshon Jeffrey, man, that guy was 2 steps behind all year long. I mean, he essentially quit on the team. If you look at how many drops there were, if you look at after week 5, the Eagles had 15 drop passes. That was the most in the NFL at the time, and no Eagles receiver had more than 2 at the time. So the drops were everywhere. It wasn't just like, Nelson was, absolute downright terrible. It was everybody, man. And And he was the 10th most sacked quarterback. I'm not going to blame the offensive line. The offensive line was fine this year. But
was he the 10th? I don't believe that.
Yes.
I don't believe that.
38 sacks.
Okay. I think I might have been looking at sack rate.
Yeah. Carson was the 10th most sacked. I definitely agree with you, man, that, Carson made some very bad reads. Like you said, he almost always seemed to neglect the easy check down route. That was 100%. And I also agree with you, man. It felt like for times, that Miles Sanders was the best receiver on this team. Zach Ertz, regardless of the yards, he was absent for a good chunk of the season. And then I'll go. I gotta say that I didn't see the same production from the wide receiver core, man. Deshaun Jackson was nothing this season. And then you look at what happened in the second half of the season. Guys like Greg Ward, these guys came in and started to make catch after catch and play after play. So I will say that.
Yeah, sorry. First of all, Wentz was 18th in sack percentage. So a big reason he was top 10 in sacks was just because they threw the ball, I think, fourth most in the NFL. They were just throwing the ball all the time. As far as the second half of the season,
Is that Wentz's fault though, or is that Mike Groh or Doug Peterson?
I don't think it's a fault at all. I think more teams should throw the ball more. So I think it's credit, not fault. Especially once Jordan Howard went down. Miles Sanders is a much better receiver than runner. Boston Scott, better in space than between the tackles. So I think it was, I don't think it's fault. I think personnel kind of just forced them into being a passing team. And the numbers say that you should pass it a lot more than run it anyway. So I think that's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing.
I disagree with that, man. I think when the Eagles got going, when Carson Wentz got going, he was in that 40 pass attempts per game range. If you look at earlier in the season,
40 pass attempts per game is a ton. That's not normal.
I mean, it's better than it was because they were, hitting, 50 plus on a routine basis, man.
So we agree. It's not a problem that they were throwing the ball out, but it is something that you have to take note with Wentz's numbers. Is that all of the total numbers are inflated because of how much we were passing the ball. Now, we talk about the last half of the season. It's not really the last half of the season. That includes the Patriots game where we didn't do anything. The Seahawks game, which might have been one of Wentz's worst games of his entire career.
Easily.
So when we're talking about the last half of the season, we're talking about the last quarter, the Giants, Redskins, Cowboys, Giants finish. First of all, as far as, we look better, we scored 17 points in regulation against the Giants the first time. We scored 17 points against the Cowboys. We scored 20 points against the Giants before two, I think, defensive touchdowns. Or there was a fumble. We had one from the 1 yard line and then a defensive touchdown, I think. The offense didn't really play better. I think people kind of got fooled a little bit because it looked better, but it wasn't really more productive in any way. And the big thing that they changed, and I don't know how many people noticed this, based on conversations I've had, I think a lot of people missed it. What the Eagles basically did down that last stretch is simplify the offense to a degree you typically do not see in the NFL. I talked earlier making those progressions from deep to shallow, and they actually flipped it where Wentz's first option on most plays was a very short pass, and they were asking him to be the most game manager of game manager. Get the ball in space to Miles Sanders, to Boston Scott, to Dallas Goedert, to run after the catch, or to Greg Ward in these 5 yard outs. I think anybody who's expecting a lot from Greg Ward going forward might be disappointed. I think he averaged like 7 yards per catch or 8 yards per catch, which isn't acceptable for a wide receiver, but that's what they were asking Greg Ward to do. I mean, they were really asking these players to do the bare minimum other than Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. Look, part of that's due to injury. They didn't have the ability, but they also, a perfect example of a change. Whereas earlier in the season, they're asking Miles Sanders to run those wheel routes down the field. They actually started asking to run swing routes, catch the ball basically at the line of scrimmage, then run with it. And they were really asking Carson to do the barest minimum. And they were asking the wide receivers to do the barest minimum. And it's an incredible job by Mike Groh and by Doug Peterson to basically redo the offense on the fly to make it that simple. but it doesn't work if we're not playing the Giants, the Redskins, and the Cowboys, who are all bottom. Those are 3 bottom 8 passing defenses. I mean, they're just not good teams. And we saw, here's a great stat, kind of jumping to what we saw against Seattle in the playoffs. First of all, we could compare Josh McCown's performance against Seattle to Carson Wentz's performance against Seattle. I don't think that's fair. I'm not going
Small sample size, man.
I'm not going to do that. But here is something that's more notable. Against the Seahawks, Josh McCown came in. His first drive didn't go well. After that, other than the one drive at the end of the first half that just didn't go anywhere, his final 5 drives all went for 50-plus yards. So 5 out of his 7 total drives. Carson Wentz didn't have more than 5 50-plus yard drives all season, and he maxed out at 5. His best was 5 and 10 against Washington both times, actually. So when I talk about you're looking at the difference in these guys, Carson Wentz couldn't move the ball consistently. McCown.
It was 2 series, man. It was 2 series.
No, I'm not talking about Seattle. I'm talking about all season. Carson Wentz all season never had more than 5 50-plus yard drives in a game. Josh McCown does it 5 drives in a row because that's how simple they made this offense, that pretty much anybody who could make a proper read and proper throws can run this offense. And it really, I think people, if you look at Carson Wentz's numbers down the stretch, they look a lot like Josh McCown's in that playoff game. But even then, he wasn't consistent enough. And when a lot of people, when I bring up Carson Wentz, the most common response I've gotten has been, "Well, did you see that amazing throw to Miles Sanders in the corner of the end zone? Who can make that play?" That type of thing. And my issue with Carson Wentz has never been that he can't make the amazing play. It's that on a play-to-play basis, he just wasn't good enough this year. If you look at his overall numbers, his comps are guys like Tyrod Taylor when he was in Buffalo, Case Keenum. People don't like to hear it, but last year's Eli Manning is another good comp. Those types of he played like a quarterback who is good enough to start, but who you're looking to replace. That's where he was, and I think even with better receivers, when you go into the tape, that's the level he was. He left too many plays on the field and missed too many throws. There was one game, and I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head. I want to say it was the Patriots game, where at the end of the game he missed like 3 or 4 throws to Zach Ertz, and that was just what he was doing all year. And I don't want to say he can't get better. He was way better in 2018. He was an MVP in 2017 before going down. But I think that people have gotten so used to remembering the Carson Wentz from 2017 and 2018 that they're offering these excuses. The wide receivers weren't good. Mike Groh is doing a poor job, which I just don't get. People so want him to be that player that I think they just missed that he wasn't this year. And I hope, look, I have my Carson Wentz jersey on. I hope he returns to being at least a 2018 version. But we're now talking about a player who tore his ACL in 2017, fractured his back in 2018, has a major concussion, and from what I've read is really, really bad in 2019. Whether it's his fault or not, the best predictor of future injury is past injury, and we can't ignore that he's injured, and that he's likely to get injured again in the future, and that each time he gets injured, that performance level can drop just a little bit, and it's very, very concerning.
All right, so all right. First of all, I'm going to start off with, I agree with you, man. Carson Wentz struggles against teams with winning records. I can't deny that. And that's probably why I'm hurting so bad. Carson Wentz was 3-8 against teams with a winning record. Over the last 2 seasons, he was 9-8 between 2016 and 2017. He had a phenomenal last month of this season. Me personally, he wasn't even the best. He wasn't even the MVP of the team. I go with Brooks or I go with Lane Johnson easily, man. So I'm not saying Wentz was, the reason for, this surge, even though I thought he played great. But you got to consider Carson Wentz. He had 607 pass attempts this year, which was the 4th most ever by a quarterback throwing 7 or fewer interceptions. Only Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, and Matt Ryan had more. Dude, so let's talk about that concussion, because can I take your head and put it between my door and slam it 8 times and see if you can play quarterback? Does that make you injury prone, man?
So, first of all, if I let you do that, this podcast is probably ending. Probably not. So let me just address the interception part real quick, and then I want to kind of talk more about the injuries. I think that's a good place to move next. Carson Wentz, one of my biggest issues, even before this year, going back to 2016. Carson Wentz, I believe the status has the most fumbles in the NFL since he entered the league in 2016. He was second in the league this year in fumbles. Is a rookie behind a shitty line. You don't even count Daniel Jones. Carson Wentz in his 4th year is expected to do better than a rookie behind a bad line. If you include those fumbles, I calculate a turnover percentage, which is basically interceptions plus fumbles lost divided by pass attempts plus sacks to try to get a bigger picture. And he goes from one of the least turnover prone quarterbacks in the NFL to right around average. And the fumbles count too. He fumbles just far too often, and you can't just ignore that just because they're not interceptions. That's part of the game.
It's revisionist history, man. He has no history of concussion problems.
Okay, so injuries. Let's talk about injuries.
Yes.
I do a lot of looking at injuries, usually for draft prospects, trying to figure out, is this guy going to get injured in the future? One thing that cannot be done, I am not blaming that concussion on Carson Wentz in any way, shape, or form. Let me start there. That was not his. Him getting concussed there was not his fault, to the extent that was a dirty hit. Clowney was headhunting, but at the same time, have you gone back and actually watched the full play he got injured on?
I mean, other than like maybe he needs to stop diving head first, man. But
have you gone back and watched the full play he got injured on?
Were you talking about the Clowney hit?
Yeah.
Yeah, like 1,000 times.
What was the play call there?
Ah, man. Go ahead. I'm not sure.
Exactly. So what a lot of people are missing is that was a screen pass, and it was actually a screen pass that got blown up. And I watch most games, most weeks, most years. When a screen pass gets blown up the way that one did, a quarterback throws the ball into the ground at the pile's feet and lives to play another day. Carson Wentz pulls the ball when the screen pass gets blown up, runs the other way, sees a defensive back, cuts back in to where the defensive line is chasing him, dives forward, and what actually happens is he posts his right arm and turns directly into Clowney while keeping his knees up. When Clowney makes contact, Wentz has not hit the ground yet. So while that was a dirty play 100%, it's the reason Carson Wentz seems to get injured every year is he puts himself in avoidable bad positions, and because he has an injury history, the best predictor of future injury is past injury. One thing I saw, concussion, once you get concussed once, you're 3 times more likely for future concussions. Whether or not it's his fault, now that he has a concussion, he's more likely to get concussed again. And to ignore that is just ignoring science. Like, it's unfortunate. I don't like it. But it's the reality. And Carson Wentz is going to have to be a lot smarter in avoiding those very avoidable situations. That play should have been a spike, and that should have been it. And instead, he took an unnecessary hit. And Wentz's penchant for taking unnecessary hits is a big reason why every year except for one since college, he suffered some sort of injury that required a couple weeks off minimum. And I don't see that changing unless he can change his play style.
Do you want Joel Embiid to change his play style too?
Yes, absolutely. Watching Joel Embiid flying on the ground for loose balls in February in an unnecessary game is absolutely terrifying. There's no reason for him to be doing that.
All right, man. All right. Let's talk about how would you grade Carson Wentz's season? I'm going to guess probably like a D?
So I'm going to give him a C-. Okay. I'm going to give him a C- because I thought he was a starter level. I thought he was good enough to be a starter, primarily because of how good he was in the red zone. That can't be taken. When he got into the red zone, he was great. Everything else was terrible. I mean, everything else was, Trubisky level. I mean, but it matters if you can finish in the red zone. That's 50% of the game, isn't it? So I'm going to give him a C- and say he's got to do better next year. And I'd like to see them bring in some real competition. Not his friend Nate Sudfeld, not 40-year-old Josh McCown. Actual somebody who, if Wentz is struggling again, that they would not feel bad putting in.
I give him right around like a B+ range. This was a tale of two seasons. You had the first half, which kind of spiraled down to the Seattle game, that first Seattle game, and then it kind of rose up as I thought the play calling improved over and over again. But then the shit just hit the fan, man. You lost Lane Johnson. You lost Brandon Brooks, man. Ever since then, Carson Wentz had a 98.1 quarterback rating with Lane Johnson. That Seattle game was such a microcosm of the entire season, man. It just wasn't in the cards this year, man.
If my quarterback needs an elite offensive line with all 5 members healthy and more than 3 good receivers, even if they're not wide receivers, and needs, then he's not a good quarterback. I mean, any quarterback can be good if you put them behind an elite offensive line and give them weapons. Look at Jared Goff last year, who was terrible and still put up amazing numbers. That's not the measure of a quarterback. The measure of a quarterback is how good he is when he has to throw to Jordan Matthews. And when he can't do it, I'm not blaming Jordan Matthews because he couldn't figure out how to throw it. Jordan Matthews, I felt terrible for him because he got cut after having a legitimately good game that Carson Wentz just completely screwed him on. And that's why I give Wentz a C-. I remember I argued a lot about Tyrod Taylor a couple years ago when they replaced him. And his numbers, if you look at the season he got replaced after, it's almost identical to the season for Wentz. But he had the same problem. No weapons. And I said, well, he left too many plays on the field. Wentz left too many plays on the field this year. And our scoring numbers showed that.
Every quarterback
and even later in
throws, man. Every single quarterback in the NFL misses throws. It's just
missing throws is one thing. Wentz misses them more often, and more problematically, he makes the wrong read far too often, and that's the real problem. It's not just missing throws. If you hit a 5-yard throw on a play where there's a 20-yard play downfield, you screwed that up too. And that really was Wentz's problem, is that he never got his progressions right. And that's why those last 4 games, they simplified it to a degree that you would really expect from an undrafted rookie. I mean, that's how simplified they made it. And luckily we were just playing teams that just had terrible defenses. And we still, again, 17 points against the Giants. I mean, I'm sorry, you shouldn't be impressed about a 17-point performance against the Giants that we had to go to overtime to beat them. That's not a good performance by any stretch.
Why can't we talk about Dallas Goedert missing the beginning of the season? Why can't we talk about the lack of a preseason? They didn't play together until the regular season started. Why can't we talk about the defense being, basically bipolar? Every single time the offense brought it, the defense shat the bed. That was a consistent theme all season long.
I think you're severely underselling the defense. I wrote about this a little bit earlier in the season. The defense had a couple of really bad games. I'm going to say the Minnesota game was terrible. That game was just a bad game. Absolutely terrible. But in the most part, if you look at the games where they gave up the most points, what you're going to see is that the offense turned the ball over and the defense couldn't defend 30-yard fields for giving up touchdowns on short fields. Most defenses can't do that. I think the defense bowed out the rest of the team far more often than people realize. And I think that Giants game, for example, when the offense couldn't get anything clicking that first Giants game, they stood in. That second Giants game, the Giants were right there, and the defense pulled away. The Cowboys game against Dak Prescott and the top-ranked Cowboys offense, and they hold them to 9 points. Okay, that defense, when push came to shove, every defense in the league has bad games. Even the Patriots defense had bad games. They were the number 1 defense. The Eagles even had 2 or 3 really bad games, but for the most part, they were great. And I think if you just look at the points allowed numbers, what you're going to see is that the offense really just put them in bad positions. And I'd really give the defense credit. And to your point about guys being injured, look,
that changed the offense.
If Carson Wentz was making the right reads and throwing good throws, and there was just mistakes here and there was a couple mistakes. Mac Hollins, for example, often ran bad routes. Okay, those I blame on Mac Hollins, and Mac Hollins got cut for good reason because he was not good. But then I watched Jordan Matthews running the right routes and Carson Wentz not getting the ball to him in the right places, or Nelson Aguilar getting open on almost every play.
I did not see that.
So I recommend, if you didn't see it, go back, choose a random game from early in the season, and chart Nelson Aguilar, and I think you're going to be surprised at just how often Carson Wentz either pumped and couldn't get the ball out.
I agree with you there.
Or missed behind him, and you said Nelson Aguilar reaching behind him. Actually, the play that Nelson Aguilar injured his knee on that ended his season was a play to the back of the end zone, and Aguilar actually overran it and had to reach back because the ball wasn't thrown to the right place. It was just a constant theme, and I think if you went back and charted, because that's what I did, that's both on my Twitter and on the website. I charted 3 games from Carson Wentz, including one where I specifically charted wide receivers, and they were open all the time, and Wentz just was bad. And that I had to go back and chart it myself. And I think if you went and did that, I think you might see what I'm talking about. Because what happens is people forget the misses. Everyone remembers that Miles Sanders throw to the corner of the end. And I said Miles Sanders throw to the corner of the end. You know what play I'm talking about, right?
Of course.
Okay. But do you remember that incompletion on 2nd and 5 in the second quarter?
Every quarterback misses throws, man.
I agree. I agree. But the difference between a good quarterback and a bad quarterback is maybe 5 to 10%, 1 or 2 missed throws a game, and Carson Wentz was missing 2 or 3 more than what you would expect. And that's the difference between being a good starter, a mediocre starter, or a backup. I mean, we're only talking about 1 or 2 plays a game. That's really all the difference is. And Wentz is falling way too far to he's missing more than an average quarterback should miss. And that's why I say he's not average. He wasn't average this year.
All right. Let's move on. There's a lot of disagreement. We should continue this on another pod. But let's move on to what we think the Eagles should do personnel-wise moving into the offseason and 2020. Let's start off. What are your major positions of need for the Eagles? Go ahead, man.
Biggest needs to me, linebacker. Bradham is probably gone. Camus Brugiel wasn't a starter to begin with. I don't even know who else was playing. Nate Gary's not a starter. We don't have any linebackers. And to the extent that our defense struggled this year was typically against tight ends and running backs. And so I'd certainly be looking at a core linebacker. Safety, a lot of those plays where people blame cornerbacks was actually bad safety play. McLeod's a free agent. Jenkins is angling for a big contract that I'm not sure we're in a position to give him, only because we're in a transitional period, and I think a lot of those older players need to be transitioned out.
You got to get younger, man. You got to get younger. You got to get faster. You need playmakers.
And so my biggest needs by far, give me 2 linebackers and at least 1 safety. Maybe, depending on what they do with Jenkins, if they try to make him play out his last year of his contract, but I think that would get pretty messy. That's where I'm looking. I know a lot of people are looking at cornerback. I don't see it. We still have Sidney Jones, who looked better later in the year and the limited opportunities he got. I'm a big fan of Cre'Von LeBlanc, who I know is one of your favorites.
The only one.
Avonte Maddox is back next year. Rasul Douglas is a fine cornerback. I think he'd look a lot better if we had safety play. I just don't see a need at cornerback. I know a lot of people say wide receiver. I think I mentioned that earlier. The big thing at wide receiver, Alshon Jeffrey's back whether you want him or not. Deshaun Jackson's back whether you want him or not. They're back because their contracts say that they're going to be back. J-Jaw, 2nd-round pick, is going to be back. Zach Ertz is going to be back. Dallas Goedert's going to be back. Miles Sanders is going to be back. Maybe I bring in, a 3rd, 4th type wide receiver to be a speedster. Like the Chiefs had Mecole Hardman to just run those fast routes, and he wasn't a good wide receiver, but every now and then you can hit a home run. So I'd look to bring in maybe a mid-round pick from the draft that's a home run hitter. But other than that, our guys, whether you want them to be or not, are going to be those guys next year. And again, as I've mentioned multiple times, I don't think it was the wide receivers' fault this year anyway. So I think those big needs are linebacker and safety. I think the rest of the team's in good shape. I think this was, look, this is a 9-7 team that I think if Carson Wentz can return to even his 2018 form, it is a 12-win team. This was still a good team. And if they can just get a little healthier and a little bit faster on defense, and I think that middle of the defense is really where they need to focus. I think we're right back to the top, and quite frankly, with Mike McCarthy and whoever the Giants, Joe Judge, was it?
Joe Judge, yeah.
And
I was, first of all, I got to start out. I got to throw this out. I was so happy today that Matt Rule went to the Carolina Panthers. For anyone that doesn't know, I'm a diehard Temple Owls fan. The fact that he stayed out of the NFC East, man, yeah.
I wouldn't say anything about Matt Rule. I'll just say that I don't see any of the NFC East teams really posing much of a threat to us if we bring back even our normal team. And so I think we need to stay healthier, get a little younger. But look, Jason Peters probably gone, but we already have Andre Dillard. Vitai's probably gone. We have Mailata. If he could stay healthy, he's that swing tackle again. So it's really hard to see. The defensive line, maybe we could use a little bit of new blood. But I think those early picks got to go to linebacker and safety. I think those are where the dollars are. I think if we shore that up, everything else is going to come down to, can Carson Wentz play better? Whether it's coaching, whether it's wide receivers, whether it's him, the fact is that Carson Wentz's production needs to be better. And whatever needs to make that happen needs to happen. And if it's not, we're going to have another season like this year. And if it is, we're going to be flying high.
I agree with you on one regard. I agree that we need to get younger and faster. I disagree with you. I thought the wide receivers were complete crap this year. Alshon Jeffrey, I think priority number one is packaging, some sort of asset from the Eagles, whether it's a draft pick or a player, and shipping him out of town as soon as possible. Nelson Aguilar, don't let the door kick you on the way out.
I just want to pause you real quick. The thing with Jeffrey and Jackson is they leave too much dead money behind. It's just going to be really hard, even if we were to trade them, because of the signing process. It's just really hard. And quite frankly, we're going to agree on the wide receivers. But if you're expecting them to get shipped out, and anybody listening to this, watching this, don't expect it. It's just the cap math doesn't work.
All right. Well, I think personally this is one of the biggest Eagles drafts in recent history. The Eagles have a first round pick. They have a second round pick. They have 2/3 and 3/4. I believe what it is. For me personally, I think they need to focus on playmaking, and for me that is wide receiver and cornerback. I do not believe in Jalen Jones. I do not believe in Ronald Darby. Jalen.
Darby's gone. Mills and Darby are both gone. They're both
gone. Yep.
They're both gone. So the quarterbacks next year are going to be some combination of Maddox, LeBlanc, Jones, and who am I missing? Maddox, Douglas. Could we use a little bit more depth there? Yeah, but I think if you look at a lot of the plays where they got burned deep, I think a better safety. A lot of those plays you can watch them talking after the play, and it's usually McLeod or Jenkins screwing up. If the right guy falls to us, I think we shouldn't hesitate to take a cornerback, obviously. But I think, again, it's hard. Football's a team sport, and it's hard to assign that, figure out where the credit, where the blame lies. I think a lot of people like yourself see cornerback and wide receiver. I kind of see quarterback and safety. But we got to get better.
I look at that Sidney Jones miss, man, is so huge, especially when you look at Darby and Mills as free agents. I love what I saw from Crevon LeBlanc in that short sample size. Avonte Maddox, perfect slot cornerback, but he took maybe 3 steps backwards this year. I look at $20 million in cap space. You absolutely need 2 new linebackers. Grugier Hill, keep him if the money is right. He's a good special teamer. I think Nigel Bradham is gone. He's going to want too much money. There's no way you're going to be able to afford him. They need 2 new safeties. This is kind of a weird situation where Jim Schwartz is getting an interview with the Cleveland Browns. To me personally, this might be the perfect time to kind of get some new blood at defensive coordinator. And
so I don't know if you heard. There's whispers that Jim Schwartz's contract is just up, that he's actually just not going to be here next year regardless because he's a free agent and they didn't. I haven't been able to confirm it, and nobody else seems to. But he was signed here 4 years ago. Most coordinator contracts are 4 years, not 5 years. And I haven't heard anything about an extension. I haven't heard anybody asking the Eagles to interview him. which is typically what would need to happen if he wasn't a free agent. So I actually think that Jim Schwartz might actually be gone one way or another, even though we haven't heard much noise about that.
That's interesting.
I like Jim Schwartz, but if we replace him with somebody else, as long as a reasonably good person and not Billy Davis, I think I would be happy with that.
Derek Barnett, like defensive line, Derek Barnett took a step back. He's not good enough right now to rely on. Vinny Curry, he had a strong second half of the season. Bring him back on very cheap salary. But there's just so many question marks, man, on this roster. Personally, I let Jason Peters walk. Let's move Dillard to left tackle. Let's give him that shot. He deserves it. I think one of Jenkins and one of McLeod is going to return. Personally, of course, I go Jenkins. No more than a 3-year contract. I personally would give him that money right now. And if he just says no, let him test free agency, because I'm not going into that $14-15 million range, even though I'm going to be shitting my pants, because Jenkins off this team, man, that's going to be a really bad situation.
So Jenkins was just really, I'm going to say average this year. He was really good at times, and he was really bad at times.
He's the glue, man. He was fucking glue.
Well, sometimes you gotta replace the glue. Sometimes it just gets dry and crusty, and you gotta.
That's some muddy waters right there, man. That's kind of scary. Then you have, like, what if Jason Kelce retires, man? What if he finally retires? Then you move Sayamalu to center. That also scares the shit out of me.
Absolutely. I wanted them to go interior line last year in the first round of the draft, and I think the Eagles did too, actually. And the top interior linemen all went off the board, like the top 16. They just couldn't get high enough for that. But hey, Matt Pryor, I got to give Matt Pryor a lot of credit. Stepped in for Brandon Brooks. Really, I think his first start ever. Maybe one other game at some point that I don't remember. But I didn't notice him against the Seahawks. I don't know if you did. But if I don't notice an offensive lineman, it means he's doing a pretty good job. So maybe they have something there in Pryor to play guard. Jeff Stoutland's an amazing coach. If there's one position I typically feel comfortable with, it's offensive line, because Jeff Stoutland has those guys ready to play every week.
I fully agree, man. Stoutland and I think Deuce Staley, personally. I really was impressed by Deuce Staley this year, just developing the running backs. Was his rotations perfect? Probably not. But regardless, I think that's if there is someone that deserves a promotion, like you said, Stoutland, and it's Deuce Staley. Let's keep on the coaches here. What would you do with Mike Groh? So
I've made it very clear. Let me ask you this before I say what I would do. Are you on the fire Mike Groh?
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
I've asked this to a lot of people, but what did Mike Groh himself do this year that you thought wasn't good enough?
I think that's like the giant mystery on this team, because since he's been on the Eagles, there hasn't been, any kind of rhythm on offense since that Super Bowl run. And I think everyone's trying to point fingers. There's a lot of the play calling. Is that Doug Peterson? Probably. Yeah.
Doug Peterson calls the plays. I mean,
yeah.
Yes.
But I just think the problem is Doug Peterson is a collaborator. Doug Peterson takes everyone else's kind of minds and forms his offense. And I think that's the biggest problem, is that he's not good enough. And if Doug Peterson needs someone better to kind of collab with and, get an offense rolling, I think that's step one.
So this is where it all comes down. This is what it basically comes down to for me. There's scenario one, which is the wide receivers weren't good. Goddard had a couple of really kind of big time drops, especially in the first half of the year. And the coaching wasn't good enough. And, if we fix the coaches, we got wide receivers, everything's going to click. And we have scenario two, which is Carson Wentz wasn't good enough. And that's why everything looked bad. And I think I've made it clear which side I fall on.
It's all of it.
It's kind of Occam's razors here. So when I look at what Mike Groh did this year, first of all, I have to mention that Doug Peterson himself said that Mike Groh did a fantastic job and praised him. Now, was that trying to help him out? He can go back and forth on that. But, looking at what they did, the first 12 weeks of the season, they were running the same offense that they ran in 2018 and the same offense that they ran in 2017. And those last 4 weeks, or really 3.5 weeks, starting at halftime of that first Giants game, is when everything changed. Was that Doug? Was that Groh? I don't know. What I do know is that this offense is Doug Peterson's. The play calling is Doug Peterson's. Anybody pointing fingers at Mike Groh is just scapegoating, because I don't think Mike Groh does anything. And I don't think any other offensive coordinator is really going to do anything either. Doug Peterson is the offensive coordinator. Doug Peterson is the play caller. He's not going to give up the calling of the plays. So I think that anybody, could they get rid of him to appease the fan base? Maybe. I think they like him, and I think they don't have any reason not to like him. I just don't. Nobody can tell me what he did or he didn't do. And based on what I saw from this year, I thought that the offensive scheming was amazing, because if we had any worse scheme, I think this team would have won 5 games. I mean, I really think
so many interchanging parts all year long, man.
Yeah. So and look, Mike Groh was the wide receiver coach, I believe, in 2017 before he got promoted. And for everyone saying, well, Alshon Jeffrey took a step back, Dustin Aguilar took a step back, Greg Ward was ready when he was called upon to do what Greg Ward can do, which is limited, but he was able to do it. Burnett came in, I think, drew 2 big pass interference calls the last 2 weeks. They have these random guys coming in, and they're managing to make something work. Look, I'm not going to be, oh no, they fired Mike Groh. But I think anybody who is expecting Mike Groh to get fired and anything to change in terms of offensive scheme, I think is going to be very disappointed.
It's not good enough, man. And if obviously Doug Peterson is not going to be fired, he's not going anywhere. So that's step one.
The scheme is amazing. The fact that this team had a functional offense at all is amazing. And the only reason things didn't look good is number 11. And I think that and look, next year we're gonna get to see this. Next year we're gonna get either Carson Wentz is gonna suddenly start playing better, or the offense is still gonna look like poo. And we'll have our answer, 4 games into next season, what's going on here. But I would be hesitant to commit much of anything past next year until we know whether this is a coaching and weapons issue, or if this is just a quarterback issue. Because most of the time, it's just a quarterback issue.
I think that's why this loss hurt so bad, because all of our marbles, making the playoffs, beating the Cowboys, taking the division, came with the caveat of Carson Wentz getting his first playoff game. It was a huge game against the Seattle Seahawks, which you've never beaten Russell Wilson, and boom, he's out on the second, I think, offensive possession. Dude, that was the worst I've felt since the quadruple doink from Kawhi Leonard, man. I was so devastated. I literally just I worked all day Monday, but man, I was just a blob. I couldn't think. I couldn't work. I was dead.
It's gonna sound terrible. It didn't hurt me at all, because I've been calling. You can look on my Twitter. I'm not gonna shy away from it. I was calling for McCown all year. I think McCown played far better than Carson Wentz would have, and I think if Doug had actually kicked those field goals late in the game, or Miles Sanders catches that ball, we say Carson Wentz's receivers let him down all year. If Miles Sanders catches that ball, which he just gets spooked by Jadeveon Clowney and just doesn't catch it, we may be having a conversation about how Josh McCown did something Carson Wentz never could. But, Josh McCown simply in that game was better than, small sample size. Take the guy who turned the ball over 4 times against Seattle and couldn't do anything, or the guy who was moving it on them at will. He 40 years old, didn't have the arm, and tweaked his ankle on that running play, didn't have the legs to to do it in the red zone. But I felt more confident, and I think we had a much, much better game.
What?
And look.
Dude, it was over, man. As soon as Wentz went down,
As Wentz went down, it was starting. When Wentz was playing, it was over. I saw Carson Wentz play against the Seahawks the first time and he sucked. And I saw him the second time and he sucked. And he got out, and then Josh McCown moved the ball up and down the field. I'm going to take the quarterback who moved the ball
up and down the field? Come on, man.
5 drives of over 50 yards out of 6. That's pretty damn good.
All right. Let's talk about some draft prospects. We're going to start doing some draft player profiles on the Blue Root. Make sure you check that out on Twitter at BlueRootTPL. So I've got some wide receiver and cornerback prospects. At wide receiver, I'm talking about first and second round prospects. CeeDee Lamb, He's a wide receiver from Oklahoma. Obviously, Jerry Jeudy. These are guys that you're going to have to trade up, or hold on to your butt cheeks and hope they fall because these guys are awesome. Henry Ruggs from Alabama is a stud. T. Higgins. You have Justin Jefferson from LSU, and KJ Hamler would be an awesome pick at 21 or in the second round. And then at cornerback, the guys I'm looking at are Trevon Diggs from Alabama, Christian Fulton from LSU, Xavier McKinney, who's a safety from Alabama. That might be right up your alley, man. And then Damon Arnett is a cornerback from Ohio State. I'm not as high as you are on the cornerback position on the Eagles. We've already addressed that. But those are the guys that we're going to start kind of dissecting a little bit. Anything you want to bring up before we wrap this up, man?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just going to say that based on I'm not big on the NFL draft other than quarterbacks. Look for my quarterback series later this year. That doesn't have anything to do with the Eagles. The NFL draft is massive, and I just pick a position to evaluate, get all the attention, and that's where I focus. Based on my knowledge of this draft, there's so many wide receivers in this draft that I would not trade for any specific one.
Nope.
I'd probably wait for the second or third round. You look at the wide receivers who are good this year. I think you're going to see that they were many. And I'm gonna pull up that draft real quick.
My body is fully ready to take in that first 5 picks. Give me 2 wide receivers and 2 cornerbacks. That's where I'm at.
You look at last year's draft. DK Metcalf was 64th overall pick.
Let's not talk about
it. Terry McLaurin, 76th overall pick. Darius Slayton, 171st overall pick. Then you look at some of the guys drafted earlier. Marquise Brown was great, but N'Keal Harry was terrible. Deebo Samuel was getting blasted by his coach most of the time. A.J. Brown was obviously amazing. He went 51st. But then Mecole Hardman was good, but he was really just a big play guy. Paris Campbell didn't really do much of anything. Andy Isabella didn't do much of anything. So I think wide receivers are a little bit of a crapshoot. So I'd certainly be okay with drafting one. I don't know that I'd use high capital because it's a position where you see that you can get guys, especially this year where there's so much depth. Whereas I think cornerback, that's a position where it's been shown that you got to take those guys high. So first round cornerback, first round safety, first round linebacker. I'd honestly look at defense in that first round. We might look at someone like Anderson, Robbie Anderson has already been linked to the Eagles.
Bring him home. Home.
We just need a speedster to add to what we have because that's really what's as good as those vertical throws. But I don't know that we should necessarily be investing draft capital on a position that's really kind of hit or miss in the draft. And when there's other positions that are just a little bit safer. So I don't know specific names, but I think there's a linebacker out of Alabama that's getting some hype, which is normal.
I do agree that we should stay put. This is a draft that the Eagles need to throw as many darts at that dartboard as possible, and hopefully you hit on one of these guys. But wide receiver, man, I'm not expecting anything from J-Jaw next year. You can't rely on him, man. And I'm not Carson or Deshaun Jackson. I mean, this is a guy that gets hurt all the time. Personally, like I said, priority number 1, you've got to be able to find a way. Howie, figure out a way to get Alshon off the team. And then, let's get some young blood in there, man. They need to get younger. They need to get faster. I agree with linebacker, but unless Jim Schwartz leaves, there's no way they're going to invest a high value pick on a linebacker. Defensive end is definitely a possibility. As always, I think the offensive line's pretty shore up unless there's a really good guard or safety, center that is available. Supposedly, maybe Jason Kelsey retires, but I think if I had to rank it, it's wide receiver, cornerback, defensive line, and linebacker. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to stick with what I said. Linebacker, safety. I mean, those are really the only 2 positions I'm worried about. I think everything else and backup quarterback. I mean, I'm going to just keep saying it. I know people don't want to hear it, but I don't. you don't want to end up in a situation where it turns out that it really was a quarterback. You know, you spend draft capital on a wide receiver, or free agent dollars on a wide receiver, the offense still isn't working, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, that was the issue. And you don't want to be mid-season being like, ooh, we need a quarterback. And I think that people love franchise quarterbacks. I guess we'll end here. Carson Palmer, you remember Carson Palmer, had an MVP season, gets injured. Timo Van Olhoffen, I think any Bengals fans watching this, listening to this, just vomited. I apologize. Takes out his knee, comes in the next season, and is a step down from where he was. Then he goes four more completely ineffective seasons on the Bengals before they finally go, oh, this guy isn't good anymore. And you can't let that happen. You can't hit yourself. You can't let the past tie you down that much. Hopefully next year Carson Wentz is better. Hopefully he gets weapons or scheme or whatever his problem was this year and is better. But you also need to be open to the possibility that he's just not going to be, that he was the problem this year, that he's going to be the problem next year. And you need to be open to that, because if you stay closed-minded to that might be the problem, you're just going to have it every year like this year. That's the worst place to be. The Bengals were there with Carson Palmer. The Steelers have kind of been there with Ben Roethlisberger, just kind of stuck with him. Now, obviously, and you saw what happened with the Steelers this year. If they had a real backup quarterback option on their roster, they make the playoffs this year, and they didn't, and they missed the playoffs because Devlin Hodges and Mason Rudolph were not legitimate NFL options. And you see it all the time. Look, a team like Detroit with Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford's an average quarterback, and they've hitched to him for 10 years, and they've been an average or worse team for 10 years. You got to be real careful about, I remember how good he was in 2017. I love going back and watching those 2017 highlights. He was amazing. That's not who he is right now. And I think that all Eagles fans need to kind of go through a mental cleanse and enter 2020 with a fresh evaluation, because otherwise it's going to be a whole lot more years of toxic discussion of everyone trying to figure out how to blame.
All right. I agree that Carson Wentz didn't have his best season, but I also believe that last month of the season, you replicate that across an entire season, that is an MVP quality season. Let's wrap this up, man. Make sure you follow Adam on Twitter at Adam Schwartz. Check out all of our content at thepaintedlines.com and follow everything Philadelphia Eagles on Twitter at EaglesTPL. For Adam, for myself. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay awesome.
Sixers win it! Wow! Oh man, and being just posterized Russell Westbrook.